Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. So in this episode, we're looking into a story about high-tech rockets, Russian logistics, and a crazy little thing called existential dread. Russia's, not ours. We're talking about America's recent decision to let Ukraine use advanced Western missiles to target Russian territory. A decision so significant it's got the Kremlin scrambling like morning eggs. For Ukraine, this isn't just a game changer. It's like switching from playing defense in a boxing match to finally throwing some punches. And just as they have been stuck in the ring, dodging jabs and uppercuts from a much bigger opponent, Kiev discovered that their corner has been quietly holding on to brass knuckles. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
These pictures capture a historic event. For the first time ever, Russia has launched a new medium-range ballistic missile in a strike on Ukraine, a missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads. The attack was a response to Ukraine's strike inside Russia's territory using Western long-range missiles.
Let me repeat that we are conducting combat tests of the Oreshnik missile system in response to the aggressive actions of NATO countries against Russia.
The Biden administration's decision to let Kiev use ATACMS to strike inside Russian territory comes amid reports of a substantial Russian troop buildup near Kursk, including a North Korean military contingent.
So, at this stage, we're working on increasing the capability, air defense capability, and we're working on replying.
While definitely an escalation, experts challenge the seriousness of the implications of the Russian strike.
I don't think this definitely is not a sign of strength.
How the dynamics of the war in Ukraine will play out remains to be seen. ATACMS missiles, known for their precision and advanced technology, will enable Ukrainian forces to disrupt supply lines and degrade Russian military capabilities on the other side of the border.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. The Ukrainian brass knuckles I mentioned in the beginning are the long-range precision missiles like Storm Shadow and ATACMS, which have a habit of hitting their mark and leaving Russia with a black eye. Now, let's talk about Russia's corner, where they have been resting between the rounds, producing missiles and stockpiling drones for their next attack. These breaks have been a lifeline for Moscow, but they're running out of ammo. Russia's older missiles, like the Kh-22, are practically museum pieces at this point. Newer ones take months to produce, meaning every Ukrainian strike on production facilities or stockpiles delays Moscow's next big offensive. Think of it like cutting off someone's caffeine supply at 8 a.m., except instead of coffee, it's warheads, so pretty much the same thing. Thanks to the US, Ukrainian forces can now target Russian bases and supply hubs up to 300 kilometers from the front lines with ATACMS, and even further with Storm Shadow missiles. That puts critical Russian logistics centers, like the port in Novorossiysk, in the crosshairs. And the juicy part is that Russia's Black Sea Fleet, responsible for launching Kalibr cruise missiles, is stationed right there. Take those ships out of commission, and suddenly Russia has fewer missiles to hurl at Ukrainian cities. And it's not just ships either. Russia's Air Force is about to have a very bad time. The missiles in question are a nightmare to defend against. Russian bases within 200 kilometers of the front line, like those in Voronezh or Belgorod, are now easy pickings. Planes, helicopters, even bombers might as well have targets painted on them. And if Moscow decides to move those bases further back, well, welcome to the logistical circus of mid-air refueling and extended supply lines. Clowns not included, probably. But where things get really interesting is that the US isn't just giving Ukraine rockets, they're also sharing intelligence. That means no shooting blind. High-value targets like command centers and supply hubs, the nervous system of the Russian war machine, are now fair game. Hitting those will force Russia to move its key operations even further from the front. Let us not underestimate the psychological impact of this decision. For the first time, Russia's leadership knows that nowhere within 300 kilometers of the front is truly safe. command centers, logistics hubs, even the bases where they feel most secure, they're all vulnerable now. And if there is one thing autocrats hate more than sanctions, it's unpredictability. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Sarah Ashton-Cirillo from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
As usual, it is a pleasure to be speaking to you at TVP World, to give thanks to all the Polish people who have stood with us now for over 1,000 days, and to all the people watching around the world as we march towards victory.
Much appreciated. And we'll begin with a very general question. Russia is trying to basically raise, the specter of World War III, the whole hysteria. What does it really mean? Does it mean that they do feel endangered by the latest move by the US authorities to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons inside Russian territory?
One thing we have to understand, and the Polish people understand this very well, is that when dealing with the Russian Federation, you're dealing with something that's equivalent to a rabid dog. And in trying to understand why a rabid dog foams and barks and really tries to bite, it takes a lot of depth of understanding the history of where they come from. And if we look at the history of where Putin himself comes from, it's coming from a man who's been trying to live up to his own words for more than 20 years. And in doing so, he's done this sort of information attack before. This was a message sent about information more than anything militarily, and we see through it.
So would you say that we're really seeing the same thing that we already saw back in 2014? Because I do remember that, actually. The Western press was filled with these headlines. The Russians are moving their aircraft carrier towards the West. Like, they have just won. And I think this aircraft carrier right now is out of commission because of technical issues. But anyway, the Russians are testing new missile types. Putin has disappeared. Is he inside a bunker waiting to give the order for a nuclear... That was the thing. And I do remember people really getting worried about this. So would you say that this was really something that's, already well rehearsed, and we're basically seeing, another edition of the very same show?
It's exactly that. If you look back to their history, they're going into the archives and the playbooks of the Soviet Union. When they talk about bioweapons labs, they were doing that in the 1970s. When they're talking about this nuclear extortion and saber rattling and hiding Putin for some days, that's exactly what they were doing 10 years ago. And Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually put out a statement a couple of days ago and said, hey, don't overreact to this. And yet the Western media, specifically if we look at folks in the United States and the United Kingdom, they really love to live off headlines. While we're fighting this genocidal, existential war, trying to stop Russia's attacks against the Ukrainian people, they're looking for clicks. And it's not helpful. And that's why looking at the facts matter. And to look at the facts, we have to understand that this is just the same show, as you said.
Okay, so what about the actual efficiency of the Western missiles? There are some reports suggesting there are too few of them to actually make a difference. What would you say to such suggestions?
Sorry, you said the Western or the Russian?
Not the Western, the Western weapons, basically. So the number of Western missiles which can be deployed inside Russian territory.
If you look at what President Zelensky and our command staff has said, be it General Budanov, be it the Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, it's been known that we are looking to fight a war that involves combined resources, combined arms. And so just like with the F-16s, there's nothing that's a magic bullet, so to say. So the ATACMS, the Storm Shadows, they are going to be very helpful. Ultimately, though, they're just one part of the arsenal. The Ukrainian military and Ukrainian defense sector are building up their own missiles, building up their own long-range strike capacity, and all of this goes into the toolbox and will be utilized in a way to bring victory to Ukraine. So I don't think we should look necessarily and say, oh no, we only have X number of Western supplied long-range missiles when they are really just one component of this overall picture.
And also the psychological effect, because we've mentioned that on the Russian side. What about the other side? Essentially, would you say that the Russians will now no longer feel secure within this 300-kilometer radius, essentially thinking, okay, so our command centers, which used to be pretty much beyond the reach of Ukrainian forces, are now fair game? And would it be possible for you to at least suggest whether I'm right on that? Because I know that it might be classified to some extent. The Storm Shadow attack, it was, from the limited footage that we have, something that was really quite impressive. I mean, multiple strikes, you can hear them in the background. We do not really know on our side what the target was, but I am assuming that the Russians must have felt pretty insecure after that.
Let's step back to the late summer and early fall of 2022, just about 2 years ago. We will see a similar effect to what we saw then. And I'm talking about when we were able to start utilizing HIMARS against Russian command and control centers, against Russian logistics operation centers. And that created a devastating impact among the Russians because they understood that certain capacity that they thought they had, they no longer did. And that is one of the keys to what you just explained. In utilizing these Western weapons and utilizing the effectiveness of them has very much sent a message to the Russians that what they thought they knew, they can no longer count on. And Russia likes to be on the offensive when it comes to surprises. And now they have to be on the defensive, waiting for what comes next.
So would you say that Russia was trying to regain this sort of narrative superiority by using their long-range missile? I'm referring to the one that was initially said to be an ICBM. Later on, it was actually confirmed it was an experimental type of an intermediate-range missile with a conventional warhead, obviously, but multiple warheads carried within a single delivery vehicle. What was the intention behind this strike? Because obviously this has been making the headlines after what we've seen happening in Dnipro.
It absolutely was an information operation, and really it was a slap in the face to President Trump and the incoming administration. If you look back to 2018, you will see that President Trump made the decision with the advice and on the advice of the Secretary of State, Pompeo, to go ahead and remove the United States from certain missile treaties with Russia due to the fact that Russia was lying, as they do, about every aspect of that treaty. And what the United States found at that time is that Russia had never stopped work on these intermediate range ballistic missiles. So President Trump made the very strong decision and said, listen, we're not going to negotiate with people who are lying to us every day. So I don't believe that there is any coincidence that as President Trump prepares to take office for a second term, this was a message from the tyrant Putin to say, hey, we remember what you did back in 2018, and we still don't care. And it's absolutely a slap in the face to President Trump, along with the fact that it sends a message to the Western world that Russia is still attempting to enlarge their arsenal, despite the fact that they are woefully undersupplied with domestic products necessary for their defense industry.
So a slap in the face can actually galvanize the new administration to act. It does seem a bit unusual because there were many people, many commentators in particular, saying that look, this is a moment when the new US administration may wish to make a deal with Putin. Do you think that perhaps the Russians never actually believed that in the first place, and what they are doing now is simply a confirmation? Yeah, you know, we know that any US administration is going to have a hard time with us, but we're not going to go down easily. And look, here we are. You can feel vindicated because we were working on these missiles all along. So there you have it. The missiles are there. We can use them. What are you going to do? How do you think the new administration may respond to this sort of blatant violations of those treaties? Also, but, you know, to the very attitude that the Russians seem to be presenting on the eve of the new presidency?
Whatever happens with the confirmation process of the Trump administration, I don't want to speculate, but it seems as though a lot of these different potential cabinet members and cabinet level members will be confirmed. However, whatever takes place, it can really not be any worse than the weakness and cowardice of the Biden administration, specifically what we've seen from Jake Sullivan and others in the NSA. I'm saying this as an American taxpayer. I'm not saying it in official capacity of any of the defense forces. However, knowing what we've seen, knowing what we have had to watch for over 1,000 days, I have great hope that President Trump, being a very, very astute individual, will be able to see this for what it is, and that Vladimir Putin has no opportunity to negotiate because the Russian soul is owned by Iranians and North Koreans and Chinese now. The Russian soul, Ruski Mir, doesn't exist. It's been sold out to other countries. And this is why Vlad Putin will not be able to negotiate in good faith. He owes too much to his creditors. And President Trump and his team, I think, will see that.
And one could say, just to conclude, that, another example of bad faith is the leaked so-called Russian plan for Ukraine, which essentially calls for the elimination of independent Ukrainian statehood. I mean, this is a plan that might as well have been drafted in Nazi Germany during World War II. They had similar plans for a country like Poland, essentially destroying the capital, rebuilding it anew, creating a sort of like a provincial administrative center, eliminating any vestiges of national identity. Would you say that this, once again, is a statement of intent from Russia? No, we don't really want to negotiate in good faith.
One thing that we understand about the Russian Federation under Vlad Putin is that a lot of times they telegraph or they indicate what they're going to do. And you brought up a great point. The Polish people, through a devastating historical relationship with the Soviet Union, with Russia, understands what it is to see a partitioned country. And nobody can take it seriously except to recognize and realize that the Russian mindset will not be reset through any means but force. The understanding that diplomacy will play a role is clear. But first, Russia must pay the price for their genocidal actions, not just against Ukraine, but in Syria and elsewhere.
So a reset would be in order, except, you normally just go back to factory settings. But with Russia, these are the factory settings, regrettably. So it might actually be a long time before things change. Sarah Ashton-Cirillo was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Slava Ukraini, and thank you.
Thank you. And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. The former head of Ukraine's armed forces, Valery Zaluzhny, now serving as Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, has expressed a dire warning about the global ramifications of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Zaluzhny believes that with the involvement of Russia's autocratic allies in the war against Ukraine, 2024 has become the year of the onset of World War III.
Valery Zaluzhny has emphasized that with the increasing involvement of Russia's allies, including North Korea and Iran, the conflict has expanded beyond a regional war. He suggests that the events of this year signal the onset of a larger, global confrontation resembling a world war. Zaluzhny highlighted how what started as a war between two nations has drawn in multiple countries through direct military support. North Korean troops are reportedly fighting on the front lines, while Iranian drones and missiles continue to target Ukrainian civilians. Evidence also points to the use of Chinese-manufactured ammunition in Russian weaponry. He cautioned that while Ukraine can endure with technological advancements, it is unclear whether the country can secure victory without broader support. According to Zaluzhny, the window to prevent the conflict from spiraling further is still open, but decisive steps must be taken now.
In a significant escalation of economic pressure on Moscow, the United States has imposed sanctions on Gazprom Bank, Russia's third-largest lender, and over 50 additional Russian financial institutions. The move, announced by the Biden administration, aims to further restrict the Kremlin's ability to fund its war in Ukraine, as President Joe Biden prepares to leave office in 2 months.
The introduction of sanctions on Gazprom Bank marks another step in the US's effort to curtail Moscow's economic lifelines and sustain pressure on Russia's war apparatus. Gazprom Bank, crucial for facilitating Russian energy exports, had previously avoided sanctions due to concerns over potential disruptions to global energy markets. This latest decision, however, has shifted that approach, targeting one of Russia's last major financial conduits to the international system. The sanctions also encompass over 40 Russian securities registrars and 15 finance officials, with Washington warning against participation in Russia's alternative to the SWIFT banking network. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller emphasized the broader intent of the action, stating it disrupts Russia's ability to use the global financial system for cross-border payments related to military activities.
Russia's State Duma has approved a 3-year budget that allocates more than $130 billion to national defense in 2025, marking the highest defense spending in the country's history. The budget now moves to the Federation Council for final approval before Putin signs it into law.
Next year, Russia will spend a record-breaking amount of money on defense. The allocation accounts for nearly 40% of the government's total spending and represents 6.31% of Russia's projected GDP for the year. In comparison, the US spends around 13% of its total spending, Germany 16%, and the UK just under 6%. The Russia's budget defense figure excludes classified expenditures and separate allocations for the war in Ukraine, which fall under other categories like national security. Combined, defense and national security spending will outpace funding for education, healthcare, and social programs in 2025, reflecting Russia's prioritization of military readiness. Alongside defense, the budget also highlights more than $68 billion for welfare programs and $60 billion to promote technological leadership. While defense spending is expected to decline slightly in 2026 and 2027, the figures indicate that Russia's economy will remain heavily focused on its military efforts for the foreseeable future.
Russia's airlines face new challenges as 34 of its 66 Airbus A320neo family jets have been grounded due to unresolved engine problems, worsened by Western sanctions.
Sanctions have already crippled Russia's access to spare parts and new aircraft from global manufacturers like Airbus and Boeing. Without proper maintenance, experts predict the A320neo and A321neo models could be decommissioned by 2026, further straining Russia's air travel capacity. S7 Airlines, one of the country's largest carriers, is bearing the brunt of the crisis, with 31 of its 39 Airbus jets grounded. The airline plans to return some planes to service next summer, but long-term disruptions are expected. These grounded aircraft make up about 10% of Russia's foreign-made fleet and could lead to a 10 to 15% drop in passenger air traffic by 2025, underscoring the growing impact of sanctions on the nation's aviation sector.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.